means. So one other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to put another sign. Because we had one up from before. So, but this time I want to do it the other way like I was telling you. I didn't actually show it, so we're going to do, let's do this kind of sign. Yeah, or no, I don't know, it doesn't matter which sign. Yeah, we can use this one. This is fine. Same kind we did last time. So I'm actually going to draw it on the map this time. I know before we used the event and did it, but this is the other way you can do it. So you can draw it on the map. And then you can actually come in and make the event, right click and go to new. And then what you would do is pretty much the same thing as we did last time. Is, you want to make this priority to same as characters. And you just don't do an image on it because it doesn't need one now because it's just, assigned to, I'll just hit OK really quick just to show you. So the event is still there and it's on top of this sign image, so you're effectively doing the same thing where you do the picture and then you've got a blank empty event on top of it. So when they look at it, when the player goes here, they won't see anything in the image of the event. But since it's right on top of the sign picture that you drew, you can do it that way too. So, and since it's the same as characters, it should block them and all that. So we want to do trigger action button. So this time I'm actually going to have it. We're going to take our first look at a switch, what a switch is, and actually we're going to use a self switch because that's probably the easiest one to do for these. So switches, these are very important things that you'll use all the time. It says a switch, it says appears when the specified switch is on. Okay, so that's good. So you can actually, if you would like to, in RPG Maker MV, you are allowed to trigger two switches, so you can have conditions where something won't happen until two switches are on for that event. So that's pretty helpful. I think in the older ones, some of the older ones, at least you were limited to one switch at a time. But you can still manage it in certain ways. But anyway, so what a switch is, you can think of switch as like a light switch. That's the easiest way that I think of, or like, a light bulb, whatever. So it's either on or it's off. And by default, all the switches are off in the game until you switch them on. So, and generally what you want to use there's a lot of uses and they're pretty powerful even just doing that. But the gist of it is, typically what you'll want to do is when something is off, one thing will happen, and when the switch is on, something else will happen. So you'll generally want to turn on a switch to change some state about, whatever it is you're trying to do. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to have the player read a message. And then once they've read the message, I want to change it to where the next time if they try to read a message again, they get a completely different message. So how we would easily do that is with the self switch. Now the self switches are a little bit different. It says appears when the specified self. Okay, so that doesn't help. That's not very helpful. But the difference between a switch and a self switch, in the earlier versions, you just had switches. Self switches weren't really a thing. I think they came out with VX, or maybe it was VX Ace when they first started them. But the difference between a switch and a self switch is a self switch is only visible and applicable to this event ID. So they're good to use for simple things like this, like what we're going to use. We're going to use the self switch because they're good to use when it's not something that you need to reference anything else in the game, really, to be able to do it. Where a regular switch, you can have that value being either on or off, and you can reference it elsewhere in the game as you need to. So they're a little bit more powerful that way. And self switches, you're limited to the number that you can use. But for this one, since it's just a very simple thing where it's like it's all just about this, sign that we want to read, this message that we wanted to change, we don't need to reference that elsewhere in the game. So self switches make the most sense to use here because it's not taking up one of your slots for a full switch that you would use for something else. So that'll make a little bit more sense in a minute here. So I'm just going to right click and go to new and show text. And just like we had before with the previous sign, I'm going to go with dim and in the middle. And I'm just going to have to eyeball this, and just like we had last time, I'm going to make the flavor text here a little bit more interesting maybe, and I'm going to say, let's see, what do we want this to say? So last time we had it say main road ahead. But now we want to say leaving camp area. And then I'm not sure what else I want to put after that, but we'll figure that out. And then here I'll just put the same as last time. The sign reads leaving camp area. I'm going to make that at least a little bit. There we go. A little bit even in the middle. And then underneath that, I'm going to add another line. Just a little bit of flavor text. I'm going to say the letters are faded and hard to read. All right. So that's the kind of thing you can do if you want to add a little bit more flavor to your, your experience here. And so I'm going to just hit OK. And just like before, when we set up the previous sign, the player would be able to read this when they walk up to the sign and they press the action button. But this time, if the player tries to read it again, I'm going to have it say something else, which most players probably wouldn't want to read this again after they've read it once, but just for the sake of example. So what we want to do here is go ahead and right click and go to new. And because after that text has displayed, we want the conditions to change. So that's game progression section here. That's what this is for. So we've got control switches. So it turns the switch on or off. We've got control variables. We haven't gotten into variables yet, but we'll get those in the future part. They're a little more complicated than switches, but we have to get switches down first. Control self switch. It says turn the self switch on off. Used only on the map screen. Okay. So we want to actually control a self switch because that's what we want to use for this. So here it says self switch. So we get to pick a self switch. And you can see we have A, B, C, or D. So self switches, you're limited to just 4. That's as many as you can have. And that's fine because most of the time, if you're going to use something more complex than 4 self switches worth, then you're probably going to want to start using either variables or full switches, the regular switch to control whatever it is. But we'll just leave it on A, and that's fine for now. And now the operation here, it says select whether to turn the self switch on or off. So by default, it's always off. So they're already off by default. So we want to turn it to on because we want and then just hit OK after that. And then we see this line here that says control self switch A equals on. So what's going to happen here is the player will read the sign. And then once they read the sign, this control self switch A is going to trigger. So here we will go ahead and do a new event page. And we can see the second event page. And you'll remember that back a ways, I think it said even on here, it says creates a new consecutively numbered page after the current. Okay, it didn't say. Well, somewhere it said that the priority goes to the next page usually. But if you didn't have this, then it would just keep going back and forth between both things. So, but what we want is for it to read this and only show this sign or this message once, and then from then on, we want it to show this other message. So, so here we go over here to the conditions. Now we want to check this box, and then we want it to go to self switch A. So it says appears when the specified self switch is on. So basically, how this is working is when the self switch is off, because this first page here does not require any conditions. It's not set up to where you have to have a switch on or a self switch on. The first thing it will do is this. And then from there, you're telling it switch A on. So from there, this page's condition will be met. Self switch A. So this one is no longer met because now it's this one because the self switch A is here. So then this one will take the priority from then on, which is what we're trying to do here. And I'm just going to copy this and paste it back in. And then again, you got to watch out for this. You got to make it same as characters again because it goes back to just the default settings. So with every new page. And so I'm going to hit space and go in here. And on this next thing, I'm just going to say something totally different. let's see, I'll just do main road is up ahead. And this is kind of, you know, obviously you could make the text a little bit better than I'm able to on the spot here, but I'm just trying to show you, like, you know, the difference between, you know, how this works exactly. So just for the sake of example, they should really think about replacing the sign. And I'm just going to try to put that back in the center a little bit, as best we can visually. And it's probably going to be a little bit off because it's hard to eyeball this stuff. You have to go back in and test it. But let's see how it looks preview-wise. Yeah, that's probably okay. So, all right, just hit OK. So now that if we set this up right, it should be reading this the first time the player, you know, presses the button. And then from then, it's going to toggle the cell switch A on. And then after that, cell switch A will be on, which will meet the conditions of page 2. And then this message will appear. And then every subsequent time that the player talks to it, this message will appear again. So that's how that would work. And like I said, this is a very simplistic example, but you can do a lot of different things with this, even with just cell switches. But you know, anything that you want to change gradually over time like that, this is a good way to do it. You know, and you could also, if you wanted it to bounce back and forth, another thing you could do is go in here and go back to control self switch and pick cell switch A and then turn it off. And now if you left it like that, it would do everything on this page first, turn the switch on, do everything on this page, then turn the switch off. So then it would go back to the first page's conditions because there's no other conditions for it. So it's one way you can do that. For this, doesn't really make sense. You don't really need it. But again, just for the sake of example, that's one thing you can do. So let's go ahead and hit OK. And now real quick, we have to do our transfer events. So I'm just going to put those in there. Now in this case, I did it a little bit differently. It's not really a way that I would recommend for you to have 2 here and only 1 here, but that's how I did it. So both of them are going to point back to right here because there's only one area, you know, one width of tile for it to go. So in this case, like I was talking about in the previous video, you can actually copy and paste and be done with it because you don't have to modify the coordinates of this one because there is only one spot for it to land. So you don't have to do a left and a right side on this one. So it's already in the right spot. So that's all we need to do for that one. And then again, we have to connect the woods area to our new map. So right click, quick event creation, go to transfer, quick location, click the map you want to move it to. And now I just have to pick which one of these I'd prefer the player to show up on. I think I'm going to use the right side one. Either one would work, but and then retain again is fine because there's only one real direction they can go at it. Okay, so now let's let's go ahead and play test and save our changes. And then we can see as we walk through the forest area, we haven't really done much of that either. Or we can see the woods. Now let's see. Read this one. The sign reads main road ahead. Okay. Yeah, so we've got that. Now, as you'll notice, as we go into this map, if you look in the top left corner, you should see the map name that we gave it, that it'll appear for a little bit. So, see campsite path, woods. Okay, so that's what it does when you give it the display name. It'll actually display it on there like that. And here we have our rooster we made from before. Now, one thing I haven't talked about yet, if you go in these tall grass areas, you'll notice the lower portion of your character sprite gets kind of semi-transparent. It's a nice little effect. It's kind of tries to show you like, you know, hey, you're walking through tall grass, so maybe the tall grass would be, you know, up to your knees or something, and it does that sort of thing in this tall grass area. So anywhere where you have that, you'll see that sort of effect going on as you walk through it. So this is looking pretty good from before. We never really did a walkthrough of it, but now we are. So here you can see pretty good You'll notice as we come out of it, it becomes opaque again and it loses a little bit of transparency. But it's just a nice way to suggest, that there's tall grass and you're having to really walk through it. So, okay, so now we have our campsite path bridge, and that was our new one. So now passability. Oh, I see we forgot a little rock thing there. We need to make the corner piece, so like we did over here. And that's one thing you'll want to test too, just to make sure, like, okay, am I able to walk past this bridge on the sides? And you can walk over here, but you can't walk off of it. And these are all things you want to make sure, passability wise. It's good to test your game quite a bit for passability issues, because sometimes things like that can sneak by you and maybe they weren't set up the way you expected them to be or that sort of thing. So, alright, so we're here on our bridge and we have our water, and everything's looking pretty good. We can't walk off the bridge onto the lower area, so that's good to know. And we can't even walk over the side areas here too, so that's pretty much perfect. So now here we have our sign again, and now so you see it appears just the same as it did when we used the actual image inside the event, so you can do it both ways and it would work. So here we go. It says the sign reads leaving camp area, and the letters are faded and hard to read. And now if we go and talk to it a second time, which again, that's not intuitive for the players, and most players probably wouldn't bother, but the main road is up ahead. They should really think about replacing this sign. And now if we do it again, the main road is up ahead. They should really think about replacing the sign. So that's how switches work. It transitions from the first page, and then when it's off, and then when you turn the switch on, then it transitions to whatever other thing you're trying to get it to do. So you can set up much more complex scenarios than that, of course, but just as a simple example of how switches work. Now, no matter what, once they've talked to it once, if they talk to it a second time or a third time or a 50th time, they'll see this second message here. So self switches are good for simple things like that when it's just isolated to this one, event, and you're not ever going to need to reference that anywhere else. You'd want to use a regular switch though if for some reason you needed to check the status of whether or not that switch was on or off. That's where regular switches come into play versus a self switch. So